We are a group of Afghan female engineers. Today, we gather to talk about our country's peace agreement with the Taliban. Our talk is in response to the President Biden's recent speech on plans to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. Our message is to the NATO and world leaders to hear the Afghan cry for help. Our fellow Afghans, this is our message to you. Please come out of the shadows and show your numbers against the Taliban. Please break free from the silence the Taliban have imposed on you. Break the terrorism grip by showing you are united. My dear Afghans, especially women, please use #UnitedAfghans by raising your voices. Our message is to everyone who stands for justice and to every woman demanding equality to support our cause. Afghan women are losing the fight for their rights. They won't be silenced only. They are going to be raped and killed. Please support our cause by using #GlobalCitizenForPeace and #WomenForWomen. The coalition forces went to Afghanistan to defeat the terrorist group Al-Qaeda in 2001 after the 9/11 attack. But clearly today, still Al-Qaeda exists. With wearing facade as the Taliban, this terrorist group daily kills hundreds of Afghan civilians, Afghan women, and Afghan children, and our soldiers. We Afghans know the truth. We, the 38 million Afghans, know we do not represent war, terrorism, or Al-Qaeda. Our US and coalition force allies know that we stand with them and we do not support foreign terroristic groups who do not want peace. Our enemies do not want for the US to stay in Afghanistan. They know the US and NATO soldiers are the harbinger of peace for us Afghans. Mr. President, Afghanistan will be used as the base for future attacks, not only on the US soil, but these vultures that destroy the Afghan land will use it as a terrorism base to execute a greater number of disasters around the world. The United States of America leaving Afghanistan is not going to serve its purpose of fighting with terrorism. I ask the President Biden and the coalition force leaders, if you accomplish this object, why do you leave in the middle of the night from your largest base in Afghanistan background? Why not celebrate this victory in the daylight like how the eagle must do? If you reached your purpose, why firsthand you did not celebrate with us Afghans who worked besides the coalition forces for peace? If terrorism is eradicated, why I cannot return to my country? Why I, the Afghan girl, cannot continue my education? Why I, the Afghan woman, must sacrifice my rights? I want to address President Biden on saying that the reason US would be present in Afghanistan is unclear now. What is not clear is Afghanistan not at the risk of becoming the largest occupied land at the hands of Al-Qaeda or the ISIS? Is there no single possibility of terrorism attacks happening from my country? US came to the rescue of the Afghan nation, so foreign invaders to not plan and execute any terrorist acts like Osama bin Laden, who was captured in Pakistan. The Afghan enemy after getting killed by the Afghan National Army, why their bodies are sent for funeral to our neighbor country if our neighbors want peace for us. I understand my tone is quite harsh, but please excuse my tone because this is not me speaking these words, but my Afghan soul that bleeds day and night. The world tells me, the Afghan girl, to give up on hope. But till the day I die, I will not lose hope for a peaceful Afghanistan and my rights. I will not stop the fight with the terrorists, whether it takes fighting, using education, or even at the cost of becoming a migrant without a homeland to return to. I will give my everything for the peace in Afghanistan, even though I have got nothing but a voice. Mr. President, you say keeping a major number of your troops in Afghanistan is not viable, but keeping concentrated number of soldiers in Afghanistan is the only solution to eradicate terrorism. Mr. President, you say you cannot expect the ideal condition for withdrawal of troops or to expect a different result. But I want to remind you, this vicious cycle is not about sending the brave soldier to my country. This cycle happens because the world chooses the wrong side in the Afghan peace talk. For the past 20 years, Afghanistan is waiting for its new generation to lead the Afghans. As an Afghan girl, I owe my life and my education to the coalition forces, to NATO, to the US soldiers serving in Afghanistan, and to the US taxpayer money, and my Afghans who are being killed in war. I want to send this message to the political analysts in DC. I am not a waste. My country is not a black hole. With calling Afghanistan a black hole, these political advisors define the sacrifices of the US soldiers and Afghan people as of only numbers. In here, I am not going to talk about the number of Afghans killed fighting the Al-Qaeda group, the group that attacked the US soil. We are human beings who all sacrifice for one purpose only, to destroy terrorism in the world. I want President Biden to ask the SIV recommenders, who most are the US Army, is Afghanistan a black hole? To ask the US soldiers if Afghans deserve getting another chance at defeating terrorists. Mr. President, you say you will not pass the duty of staying in Afghanistan to your successor, but you will accept for your presidency to pass in history books as the term that abandoned its longest ally, Afghanistan. It will be the US presidency that caused one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. The history will record that the Afghan fall will be not the last of US concerns in the globe. It will be the beginning of a new era for terrorism and war in the world. I plead from you to stay in Afghanistan, to not let another bloodbath worse than Syria or Yemen to start. And I know the next President of the United States of America and the people of the world will remember the US, the President Biden, as someone, as the leader who stood for the justice and destroyed terrorism. I ask Vice President Kamala Harris, you are the first female Vice President of United States of America. Do you support the withdrawal of US troops despite the first victims of war will be women and children? Will the first female Vice President of the United States of America save this deed for herself in the history of the world? proving that even a woman of the highest nation cannot save one country's woman. I ask you, Vice President Kamala Harris, do we Afghan girls have to be the first war casualty? Mr. President, your commitment as the leader of the United States of America and the NATO forces is peace. The valor country of United States of America and the eagle must not yield to the vultures. Your country is the nation of example for the present and coming generations. I remember the first time I visited New York, the city known as the emblem of modernization. I saw the Statue of Liberty. Its sculptor had carved his mother as a statue holding the flame of freedom. Back then, I did not know what the flame meant, why the statue held this flame, why in Olympics the nations handed over to each other. But now I know the flame means, oh women of the world, you are the harbingers of peace and liberation in the world. If the world one day abandons you, take that flame and burn yourself before others incarcerate you in the fire of violence and war. I know we Afghans proved to be inadequate towards what the world expected us to become in terms of progress and development during the past 20 years. But as a weak country, surrounded by two nuclear-powered enemies, and given our fight with terrorism, given the fact each family in Afghanistan has at least one person killed for the peace, we still deserve the presence of our allies in Afghanistan. We need the US Army soldiers and NATO countries. I understand the COVID pandemic also strains the nations around the globe, but this pandemic is teaching us one lesson, that if something happens in China, it is going to affect all the world. If something happens in India, its pain and suffering will vibrate through all the world. Corona teaches unity to human beings. From Corona, I learned if the war starts in Afghanistan, it won't be only in Afghanistan. It is going to spread, and no one can contain this fire. At the end, I beg from the First Lady, Jill Biden, and members of Mr. President's family, who are women, to help Afghan women and kids. My plea is from one woman to other women of power, to stop terrorism from raging, and for you to stop a bigger humanitarian crisis the world has yet to see. We, the Afghan women, are losing hope and are tired of men deciding our fate. I beg from all the female leaders of the world to rescue us from the hands of Taliban. We do not want any peace talk with terrorists. In this war, please support the right side and do not yield to a terrorist group who murders and rapes kids and women. Thank you. I am not here to condemn NATO and US falling commitment against terrorism, or even to compare the most powerful army in the world with a total budget more than 700 billion, with a terrorism group whose only nightmare are the US forces. I'm here first to thank the US government and the families of the 2,312 lost and 20,066 wounded soldiers in Afghanistan, military veterans, and all the US citizens. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your services. You have done great things to my country and for every girl in Afghanistan during the last 20 years. Thank you. Mr. President, you mentioned in your last speech that Afghans were never united, that's why we are facing these consequences. But I must say, seeing our brave Afghan soldier in many parts of Afghanistan, without months of pay in an effort to not only bring unity to my country, but to act with heroism in an effort greater than themselves. I'm a former US Army contractor and a student graduated from Kabul University Engineering School, raising my voice as an act of unity for my brave Afghan people and Afghan soldiers. And request all Afghan Americans to raise their voice as well to support my country. Mr. President, you mentioned in the last speech that US mission in Afghanistan was accomplished a few years ago after delivering justice to Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. And the terrorist threat had been eliminated. But just a few minutes later, you stated that the Taliban are at their strongest military since 2001. I must ask, what will be the consequences not for Afghan, but for the US citizen this time? As an Afghan girl, I wish you never taught me how to fly if today you had to cut my wings. Women deserve to live in peace and safety. We are losing our homes, relatives, and our freedom once again. Right now, one of the many faces of the Afghan resistance to terrorism is a woman, Salima Nazari, who is acting to protect her people. We need countries that have the power to act now, and prevent the massacre and genocide that will await us in the near future. We have seen what terrorist organizations have done to minority groups like the Yazidis in Iraq. And the US withdrawal of forces leaves everyone, especially women and Hazara people, in jeopardy. To the world leaders, I must notify you about the current crisis in Afghanistan. Your decision to withdraw troops from Afghanistan has already resulted in the collapse of government system in most parts of Afghanistan and affected 30 million Afghan. Our national army soldiers do not have enough backups, and the current government has already stopped all the development projects in Afghanistan. I'm requesting from the Norwegian Nobel Committee as well to support us now, and not simply nominate our girls in the future, those who survived from human trafficking and sexual slavery in the past were simply given an award for their suffering. You have the power to save the lives of millions like Nadia Murad, or ignore us now and award the survivors tomorrow. The power is in your hands. I request from the female past captives of Syrian war who fought against terrorism like Nadia Murad to once again speak about the history so it does not repeat in Afghanistan. Don't leave us behind.
I remember the years Taliban ruled in Afghanistan. They closed the girls' school and banned the women from leaving their houses. My mom asked me to learn sewing and embroidery, but I didn't want to give up on my education. I screamed to the top of my lungs and begged my mom, I want to study. We had no option but to migrate to the neighbor country despite Iranian school not accepting Afghan students. With an ending plea of my mom, finally a poor district accepted us in its school. This was the beginning of few years of hardship, a continuous of changing locations as the Iran government deported Afghan migrants. However, Iran government received billions of dollars from organizations like IOM and UNICEF each year for the sake of hosting Afghan migrants over there. And Iran government didn't help Afghans even with a single cent, and all migrants were self-sufficient. During our stay in Iran, we suffered racism at its darkest. Finally, after a few years of our migration to Iran, the NATO countries, under the leadership of US Army, they came to save the Afghan lives from the terrorist grip. For us Afghans, that year, watched the coalition forces entered our country to destroy terrorists was the best year. And Bush administration was our hero, and we watched him for hours on our TVs. We didn't look at the military planes, but at our peace eagles. We didn't watch the US and NATO soldiers, but at our heroes. My family returned to Afghanistan with peace finally arriving. The school for girls became open. Millions of girls returned to school. Most of schools didn't have enough classrooms and buildings, and the USA provided us book, pen, and blackboard. Still, all girls were happy to study under the blazing sun, sat on the US-funded carpet, as long we could study and have peace. Despite the criticism, I became the first girl in Herat engineering faculty in the male-dominated of engineering field. I endured the harshest oppression at the hand of conservatives who thought for an Afghan girl to become an engineer is sin. I suffered the cruelest climate of oppression in the hand of conservatives. I endured this only because I became an inspiration for the many Afghan female students, and so many girls later followed my footsteps. And each year it became easier and easier for the next classes as it was being accepted widely later, and the new environment changed the mentality of so many people. I never gave up on my education, and I wanted to continue my education in USA. Back then, the US Embassy in Afghanistan not issuing USA visa, and Afghans applying for a visa had to travel to Pakistan. My mom and I, again for the sake of receiving a better education, we traveled to Pakistan. On the day of my interview for my USA visa, when waiting for my interview to come, a Pakistani girl was sitting beside me. We got to talk about the Taliban insurgents, but I was shocked to hear her say, Taliban are right in their execution of terroristic attacks. And I told her, do we have more freedom than the freedom which you have in Karachi? But to my dismay, I, the Afghan girl who loved the US people, was rejected, and she got her visa. On the way back, as two women wearing no burqa in the soil of Pakistan, I remember we had to walk through more than thousands of Taliban. It was the weeks after Taliban had assassinated Benazir Bhutto, the Pakistani leader nicknamed as the Taliban mother. And Taliban militias were singing their new victory. We were fearing for our lives as Taliban in Afghanistan had once attacked my mom for wearing slippers and not shoes. But no one harmed us. The Taliban freely were shouting terrorist slogans for hours under the watch of Pakistan military. The same Taliban who were violent to the women of my country, they were kind to Pakistan's people. After my visa rejection, I focused on my career, and I became an engineer project manager in the US Army base in Kabul. While working with the US Corps of Engineers, I observed their respect. My US military supervisors didn't shake hands with the Muslim women, respecting our culture and letting us pray our prayers inside base. To support the Afghan women entrepreneurs, the USAC worked for the capacity building of the Afghan women-owned companies. Right now, our fellow Iranian neighbors are preparing to fight against Afghans only because God has given us the right to our water. In social media, they announce jihad against Afghan is mandatory because they need water. This is fight with the innocent and the oppressed. Your fight is against God, not us Afghans. You are fighting for water when we are crying blood for the honor of our girls and for the lives of our lost soldiers. In our books and the curriculum you say prepared for Afghans, we were taught a story of fight between the pen and the gun. The pen saying, I will bring peace and stop your violence, and pen wins the argument against the gun. This story is a short one, but it got deeply engraved in my mind. I was seeking education despite every obstacle, thinking the pen side will win, but I didn't know one day will come, and in the peace talks, the world will side with the gun. If I knew gun is the chosen side, as an Afghan girl, same like Kurdish allies of the United States of America, like the females in Erbil, I too would have demanded gun to fight along the US soldiers with the Taliban. I want to conclude my words. I wish for the NATO leaders, for the US leaders to hear the Afghan plea. Without kindness and compassion, no humanity will remain, and we Afghans need the words kindness. NATO and coalition forces conquered Afghanistan in few days during the time of Taliban. Now that these monsters are out of their holes, we can defeat them overnight if the world will help us and everyone come together before they will spread more terror in the region and in the world.
به نام خدا، پیام به ملت هر دم شهید افغان، درود به ارواح پاک شهیدانی که برای دفاع از آزادی، وطن و ناموس شهید شدند و تشکر از سربازانی که در گرمای تابستان با وجود تمام مشکلات و کمبودی‌ها در جنگ نابرابر در مقابل دشمن نامرد در حال مبارزه‌اند. تشکر از شما و تمام قربانی‌هایی که برای ملت افغان انجام می‌دهید. ما قدردان تک تک شما هستیم و تلاش می‌کنیم تا زحمت‌های شما پایمال نشود. خداوند به قدم‌هایتان استقامت و بازوانتان قدرت بدهد تا مشتی آتشین به دهن دشمن باشید. یک زمانی فرا می‌رسد در تاریخ همه ملت‌ها که دو انتخاب بیشتر ندارند، یا شرایط فعلی را قبول می‌کنند یا به تغییرش به پا می‌خیزند و او زمان برای افغان‌ها امروز است. یا امروز به پا می‌ایستیم و یا دیگر هیچ حقی برای انتخاب نخواهیم داشت، چون فردا خیلی دیر است. از همه افغان‌ها خواهش می‌کنم تا صدای خود را بلند کنند و صدای بشوند برای بی صداها تا همه دنیا از درد افغان با خبر شود. حداقل کاری که می‌توانیم این است که فریاد بزنیم تا شنیده شویم. در شرایط فعلی افغانستان روزی خواهد آمد که سگ و گربه به راحتی خواهند گشت، اما یک زن افغان نه، و نه هم از هیچ حق و حقوقی برخوردار خواهد بود. یک مرد نخواهد داشت چه برسد به یک زن. چگونه منتظر طالب می نشینید تا دم خانه هایتان بیاید و هیچ کاری نکنید؟ خود را این گونه به جرم کدامین گناه سزا می دهید؟ باز به ایران پناهنده خواهیم شد یا به پاکستان که به خون ما تشنه هستند؟ این بار آمدن طالبان مثل گذشته نخواهد بود، به مراتب بدتر خواهد بود. ناموس افغان در وزیرستان، کویته، پیشاور پاکستان معامله خواهد شد. چیزی که در سوریه و عراق شد بدترش در افغانستان می شود. همسایگانی که چیزی از ظلم برای ما کم نگذاشتند، آیا باز همان افغانی پدر سوخته خواهیم شد؟ آسمان تاریک وطن من پر است از ستارگانی که در خاموشی آسمانی می شوند. ستارگانی که می توانستند رهبر آینده برای ملت من باشند. جنرال رازق، سهراب عظیمی و یما سیاوش نمونه ای از آنها است. بیایید از بت پرستی دست برداریم و بت‌های سنگی را در هم شکنیم. رهبرانی که تنها یک نام از آنها بر زبان است و بس. مردم من متحد هستند ولی نیاز به رهبری صحیح دارند. برخیزید و برای خود رهبری درست انتخاب کنید، نه مثل اشرف غنی و عبدالله در سفری که دو جناب به امریکا داشتند. منتظر جرقی از طرف این دو بودیم که کاری برای افغانستان انجام دهند. در تمام طول سفر خندم چنان بر لب‌ها جاری و پر از شوق و خوشی بودند و دریغ از کوچکترین کاری برای مردم. در روزهایی که باید لباس عذاب و تن کنیم تا فاتحه افغانستان خوانده شود، پس این همه خوشی به کدام مناسبت؟ ما میفهمیدیم که یک زن نمیتواند هیچ حقی داشته باشد. میفهمیدیم نمیتواند صدایش را بلند کند، اما نمیفهمیدیم که در کشور من یک زن حتی نمیتواند هیچ خواب و خیالی با آینده داشته باشد. در مدت 20 سال این امید بود که با تمام وجود ناملایماتی که در کشور بود ما را سر پا نگه داشته بود. امید به یک صبحی که دیگر با خبر مرگ و ویرانی وطن شروع نشود. امید به روزی که دیگر جنگ نباشد و خون هیچ مظلومی ریخته نشود. تمام آبادی هایی که در مدت 20 سال در وطن شد در 20 روز از بین خواهند برد و برنده این جنگ تروریست خواهد بود. من دروغگوهای زیادی دیدم، اما هیچ کدام به اندازه سیاستمداران پاکستانی دروغ نمیگویند. پاکستان تمام کاردهایی را که داشته بازی کرده، پس دیگر برای ما نقش دوست را بازی نکنید لطفاً. آتشی را که در افغانستان به پا کرده اید دامن خودتان را هم میگیرد و او روز هم دیر نخواهد بود. یک روز نه یک روز عدالت الهی حکم خواهد کرد و او روز چه بد روزی است برای سیاه رویان. نه طالب برادر ماست نه راه بهشت از افغانستان. اگر واقعا برادری هم باشد، هابیل و قابیل هم برادر بودند. پس قابیل از هر راهی که برود جهنم است و جهنم بس. افغانستان از 4 طرف در حال جنگ است. خون میدهیم، جان میدهیم، خاک میدهیم، آب میدهیم و دشمن جشن میگیرد، جشن محقق شدن آرزوی 20 ساله. عید قربان است و همه قربانی میدهند، اما در وطن من سال هاست که هر روز ما عید قربان است و ما انسان قربانی میدهیم. زنهای پاکستانی دست خود را با خینه رنگ می کند، به سرخی خینه از عشق همسرشان، اما زن افغان دستانش با خون سرخ است. همه خوابهای زن افغان رنگ سرخ شده، بالاتر از سیاهی تقدیر ما و سرخی دستان ما نه خوابی است و نه خیالی. همسایه های مهربان من، بزنید بم بر سد و دیوار وطن من، همه چیز رو خراب کنید. آب از شما همان گونه که همیش بوده، اما به خاطر آب خون نگیرید. آب شیرین و جان شیرین یک بها ندارد. ما در جنگ هستیم. در هر جای دنیا که هستید مسئولیتمان است که سرباز وطن باشیم. از هر راهی که شده باید با دشمن بجنگیم. باید بجنگیم و سربازان خود را تنها نگذاریم. خاموشی افغان چیزی است که دشمن میخواهد. طالب اولین کاری که کرد صدای ما را برید. هویت افغان بودن ما را از ما گرفت. دستان طالب هنوز بر گلوی ما است و ما همه اسیران جنگی. خود را از اسارت نجات دهید. صدای خود را بلند کنید تا همه دنیا بشنود. دنیا می‌بیند که افغانستان و افغان‌ها در چه وضعیت هستند، اما افغان‌ها ترجیح می‌دهند نشنوند، نبینند و صدای بلند نکنند، به جای اینکه این روزها یک صدا شده و به دنیا پیام غم روان کنیم. وضعیت عادی است، همه چیز آرام، عروسی، جشن و ساد و سرود جریان دارد. مخصوصا در شبکه‌های اجتماعی و ما به دنیا پیام خوشی روان می‌کنیم. درد است این همه بی‌دردی ما افغان‌ها. همه کسانی که فالوور دارند در هر جای دنیا که هستید، به هر زبانی که میتوانید از دنیا کمک بخواهیم برای افغانستان. این جنگی نیست که افغانها به تنهایی مبارزه کرده بتوانند. باید دنیا به کنار ما بایستد. توجه جامعه جهانی را باید جلب کنیم تا افغانستان از شکست حتمی به مقابل تروریست نجات پیدا کند. بیایید صدایی شویم برای همه عزیزانی که درد از دست دادن عزیزشان تا ابد با آنها خواهد بود. بیایید صدایی شویم برای همه روزهای بدی که در جنگ سپری کردیم. بیایید صدایی شویم برای مظلومیت افغانها. بیایید دست به دست هم بدهیم تا خیلی دیر نشده. و در آخر پیامم به جامعه جهانی: اگر نمیتوانید برای رسیدن به صلح به ما کمک کنید، پس ما را همه را به افغانستان روان کنید. یک بم بزنید تا همه ما کشته شویم، تا باشد یک جوی خون برای پاکستان و یک جوی آب برای ایران. تشکر.
In the end, we thank our National Army soldiers for protecting our country against the enemies. We want to pay our tribute and honor to the coalition force soldiers killed in Afghanistan. We thank the United States of America and NATO countries for their stay in Afghanistan. We would like to pay respect to the families of all the fallen soldiers in Afghanistan. As Afghans,
to everyone helping Afghan people in this war. We can never pay your debt of honor in this life or after the death. And we wish to live and see the day the eagle will kill the vultures that are tearing apart the Afghans. In the end, we hope Afghanistan will see the sun rise once again, and I know it will rise from the west.